All right, everybody, welcome to the Nomad Strength Show. I'm Ross Hill, your host, and today I'm joined by best-selling author Jack Carr. Jack, thank you for making the time and being able to hop on with us today.
Dude, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
Nomad strength, man. I need some of that action. I've been typing away for like the last 3 years, so I am hurting in the nomad strength department. But
Yes.
this is my year to get organized. Like it's been crazy, but I need to get a little more get smarter on like processes and things like that. So I have time set aside for writing, time set
Yeah,
aside for the business part, time set aside for me because up to this point it's been like all over the place insanity, which is
totally.
good.
And it's
Good
only going
problem
to
to have.
it's only getting more so now, right? I mean, like it's just increasing every day, it seems.
Yeah, it seems that way. It's kind of crazy. And then, of course, gearing up for the first novel getting turned into a series. So I don't have no
Yeah.
idea what that's gonna look like. Sometimes when they adapt a novel, they change the name. Stephen Hunter's Point of Impact became
Mm,
Shooter with Mark Wahlberg, that
yeah.
sort of thing. But this has the same name as the book, and so we'll see. It comes out in 2022 and on Amazon Prime. So we'll see what that does. But yeah, it's all good, all
That's
good.
awesome, man. I want to ask about that in a couple of minutes, actually, because I'm glad you brought up the show. Because it just the teasing that you've been doing for months has been killing me on it, and then with the recent releases of the cast being added and all that stuff, it's just been great. So I'm super pumped to look forward to it. I just finished 2 nights ago Devil's Hand. Uh, Crushed through it in like 3.5 days. Uh, Absolutely awesome. And
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about uh, because of the theme of the book really coinciding with the last year, and I saw that you had actually kind of started this before all of that happened. Like that was kind of the theme of this novel before all the COVID stuff last year. So how did like that change the direction that you took the story when all that started happening, or like how was that process?
Yeah, so it didn't change the story at all, but I got to add what happened in 2022, or sorry, in
Yeah.
2020 into the narrative. So it
Yeah.
just added context for people, obviously, because 2020 was such a pivotal year in our country's history. But when I started outlining it or when I outlined it in August of 2019, really the theme is, I mean, the catalyst that moves the story forward is a bioweapon attack,
Mm-hmm.
disguised as something else, really,
Mm-hmm.
to get the U.S. to do I don't want to give too much spoilers away
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get the US to take a certain action. So it's not the typical bioweapon book that maybe people have read before in this genre. So it's a little
Mm-hmm.
different, but it fools you at the front thinking that yeah, it might be kind of something that you've read before, but it's really not. But the theme of the book is really what the enemies learned by watching us on the field of battle for the last 20 years at war. And then I have some older characters that learned something from 1979 to 2001 in that paradigm when we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about international terrorism, specifically Hezbollah, Iran. That's really the theme. So as we moved into 2020 and COVID hit, obviously it's tied to what I'm writing about as that catalyst to move the plot forward, the plot
Yeah.
forward with that bioweapon. But at the same time, well, the enemy's learning by a response to COVID. They're taking notes, and
Yeah.
so I started writing that because I'm writing during that time as all this is happening. And then, of course, summer of civil unrest hits, and once
Yep.
again, the enemy is learning from that. So that got woven in, and then we hit a very contentious political season, election cycle. Once again, the enemy's not just casually watching these things. They are actually taking notes. They're looking at it from a perspective of wow, they can exploit certain weaknesses and to turn things to their advantage. And that got woven into the plot. So all these things were happening during this very pivotal year that I had no idea was going to happen in August of 2019 when
Yeah.
I outlined the novel.
And from a research standpoint, for all of the things, because one of the things that I love about your novels is how detailed they are from a historical context as well, and all the things that I just learned. I just turned 29, so like when 9/11 hit, I was in fourth grade, right? And so
Wow,
like there's all these things that
make you a little bit old. Oh,
sorry. So when you're talking about all of these documents that were, signed and put into law during these times in the novel, like that's something that I would have no idea even
yeah.
remotely happened being so young at that time. And so from like a research standpoint, how did all of the things that happened last year, like, did that change how you would research? Um, going into this novel what you were doing?
Not really on the research side of the house because I
Yeah.
did that research all through the fall and early
Prior
winter
to.
of 2019 and
Yeah.
into early 2020. So it was a lot of academic research in this one, and of course
Yeah.
that personal experience that I have in Iraq and Afghanistan or whatever, I weave those in as well. But a lot of this one was academic, in that even if I knew something, even if I'd studied something my whole life, like I have terrorism and warfare and
Hmm.
insurgencies and counterinsurgencies, when I'm then putting that into a book, I have to go and confirm all those things that I thought I knew or that I kind
Yeah.
of had in my head. But you have to confirm all these facts and then tie them into the plot in a way that makes sense, of course. So yeah, the research was intensive, and then it continued because I'd get to a certain place and I'd have to go deeper, where I'd come to a problem that I need to figure out on the page, and that necessitated some more research. So the research really is continuing as I go and as I write, because I have to go back and
Hmm.
continually reference things, continually reference my notes, continually reference the index in different books to get to certain parts, to find that paragraph or to find that sentence that I need to confirm something or to answer a question. And so I love that part of it. But the other ones have been a lot of on the ground research. Like for the
Yeah.
first one, the terminal list, I'd been to Iraq and Afghanistan, of course. Then for the second one, I hadn't been to Mozambique, so I had to go there, put boots on the ground, because it was a
Hmm.
very pivotal part of the story. And I'd been to Morocco before, I'd been to the Ukraine before, so I could weave that stuff in.
Yeah.
For the third one, I hadn't been to Kamchatka Peninsula, Russia, which is just south of Siberia, so I had to go there. And that's actually where I did the outline for this novel. Was on the
Oh,
plane
cool.
to and from Russia, because I left my computer behind, I left my iPhone behind. I took a sat phone and a notepad because, I mean, who knows what people have sent me over the years, and I didn't want Russian intelligence to either suck it all out as I was walking through
Right.
customs or to physically confiscate my phone and computer. So yeah, I just brought the sat phone and hand wrote out the outline for The Devil's Hand. So yeah, this one was research intensive for sure, and some
Yeah.
people love it, and some people don't. It's
No.
interesting
Yeah.
looking at some of the reviews, but for the most part, they're very good. But some people just are really, people that don't like things are very vocal about it. And
Totally,
they take a
man.
lot of time out of
They're
their
the
life to tell you how much they hate you.
they're the loudest. They're the loudest
Yeah, I
ones, it
know.
seems.
It is, and it's hard because they're so loud. It's hard to ignore because it
Yeah.
gets you. But hey, that's just how it goes when you're in the public realm. That's part of the trade-off.
Totally. Totally. And from I want to bring up because the the fact, and I'm trying to remember the way that you worded it, but it's like your novels are fiction with like whispers of fact, right? And
Whispers of
so
truth. Yeah, nice,
whispers of
close.
truth. I
Yeah,
was close. I was close.
love it. I love it.
But that's like one of the things that I love because it's like such this fine line of like you read this and could think everything in this is 100% true. You know what I mean? But like,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I don't know if that's something that you're like trying to let us decipher what may or may not be 100% accurate. But like you read this and you're like, I could totally see all of this being a real thing.
Yeah, so because this was so research intensive, and because I didn't have a touch point with it in the military, like for the first ones, I hear that a lot. People think,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, this could sound true," and then those were a lot of conspiracies woven into those first three.
Yeah.
But for me, it's obvious that those are fiction.
Yeah.
What is the fact part of them, or how it feels to be in certain situations, like what it
Yeah.
felt like to get ambushed in Iraq, what it felt like to be on a direct action mission in Afghanistan, whatever. Like those are woven into the storyline with the feelings and emotions behind those things and
Yeah.
applied to a completely fictional narrative. And you're right. So this one was a little different. And this one was also the first time I've done an author's note at the end. I've always done a
Yeah.
preface at the beginning to kind of set the tone for what's to come. And I did that in this one as well. But then I did that author's note at the end to talk about exactly what you mentioned right here, which is, hey, what is fact? What is fiction? Because I knew when people got to the end, they might have some questions about
Yeah.
that. So I go through what's fact, what's fiction, and what I think may be true based on my research, because I have no background in bioweapons, no background in that sort of thing, other than the research that I did for this novel.
Right.
So I talk about that at the end of the book, so people don't have to go out and try to figure or wonder what was true and what was not. It's right there in the back in the author's note.
Yeah, which when I read through that, I'm like, okay, this makes and like just like you said, for a story like this, that felt like probably a little bit more of a necessity than with the other novels, just because of that's still kind of right where we are as a country and as a global population with a lot of this stuff going on. Like,
Yeah.
probably need to make some clarifications on some of that stuff.
Yeah,
But
exactly. I had a chronology of events in this one too. It was the first time
yeah.
I've done that to kind of set the tone for the people that are like, oh, I kind of remember something from 1979 or 1983 or some of
Hmm.
these different events. So I listed them all out, not all of them, but most of the ones that were significant to me growing up studying
Yeah.
this at a very young age. So I listed those out there, and I wanted to do, but I got down to the wire. I wanted to do a list of the characters in there also because there are a lot of characters. And I think in my next book, if I have time, I'll do that. But I wanted to do that in this one, but didn't quite get to it. But at least got the chronology of events in there to kind of,
Yeah.
set the tone of like, oh, this is the U.S. Iranian relationship from 1953 up to today. Obviously,
Yeah.
becoming very contentious there in
Right.
1979 onward.
And with the character aspect too, that's always with that whispers of truth thing. Like they're all fictional characters, right? But like as some if you pay attention to current climate or political climate, like you can tell like some characters are very thinly based on actual people, and I'm sure like that's probably like
Yeah.
you've got to make some super clarifications like okay, this isn't actually about this person, like that kind of conversation.
Yes. Any what does it say at the beginning? It says like in the small print, any relation to anyone living or dead is just coincidence. Yeah.
Right.
It's a
Right.
coincidence. No, but
Coincidence.
they are yeah. They there are some characters that are usually there are multiple people moved
Yeah.
into that make up one. And I do that. That's super fun because then some people will think it's they'll relate it to one person,
Hmm.
maybe not both, but either one or the other, depending on what they're reading in the news or
Yeah.
whatever else. So, first book I did that for for a certain character, and then in this one there's some others that are probably a little more loosely based on multiple people rather than just a singular
What
person or entity.
and I'm actually this came up when I was reading through the book the other day. This is the first one, and I've heard you talk about this process and how annoying it can be going through like uh, uh, Homeland Defense and State Department with all this stuff, getting all these things cleared in your books of all the things you have to write about. There wasn't anything redacted in this book. It looked like, which that hasn't been the case in the previous novels.
That's right. Yeah. So I didn't submit this one because it's so far removed from anything I did in the military.
Gotcha.
So I didn't have any touch points with anything bioweapons related at all. It
Gotcha.
was all based on research books that I read. You can go back to my blog and on social channels. I have a list of all the books that I use for research, and it's pretty high.
Yeah.
It's a stack's pretty high. I'm like holding it here in
Yeah.
my office, and it was pretty legit. So yeah, This is the first one I didn't submit just for that reason because it's just so far removed, and there's no
Gotcha.
way they can't get back to you in the 30 days that they say they will. They take 7 months to read something that most people read in a week. Not big
Right.
readers there at the Pentagon. Yeah, so far removed.
Yeah.
I just
I
didn't do
did
it.
I did my best to try to in some of the past ones and some of the past novels to like do my own research to try and like figure out exactly what the things that were redacted were, and I it's tough to dig through a lot of that stuff, but I think I did
It's
I
me.
think
It's
I
so obvious, obviously because I'm so
yeah.
intimately involved in it, and
Yep. Yep.
it's yeah. But
I
it's
think I
that's
did all right on some of them.
Nice,
Yep.
nice. Yeah, none of it's secret. So
Right.
even in the
Exactly.
second one, third one, I appealed, and my lawyers tied every single redaction to a publicly available government document,
Yeah.
meaning not
That
from like
anybody can
Wikipedia,
access.
not from someone else's book or anything, but from the government itself that you can go and download or look at on one of their websites.
Yeah.
They tied every single redaction to one of those, and on that second one, True Believer, I won 37 of the 54, even though all 54 were tied to publicly available government documents. They only let me win on 37.
That's
But
crazy.
it just shows how ridiculous that process is when they have it on their
Seriously.
own website and they still take it out of yours.
Ridiculous, man.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to dive into the series a little bit with what you can say because it's still like it looks like they're still doing some shooting right now based on recent Instagram posts. What has that process been like since it's actually become a thing that now we're shooting? So like, what has this whole process been like for you?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's growing up, I always wanted to do this since I was a little kid, serve my country in uniform and then write fiction. So I just always, in my head, from a young age, I was always like, okay, you'll be a SEAL, serve your country. At the time, back then, you thought you'd go on secret missions all around the world, and that wasn't really how it was when we first got to the team.
Right.
After September 11th, we started doing what we came in to do, or what we thought we were going to do when we came in. But then also, I knew that after that, I would write novels, just like the kind I
Mm.
was reading growing up. And then in my head, I was like, of course they'll be New York Times bestsellers, and then of course they will get adapted by some A-list Hollywood star. And in my head, I had Chris Pratt as that person, and
That's
which
so
is
great,
crazy because
man.
he's the person that's doing it. So yeah, it's cool. It's so cool to see it come to fruition like this. Still in the middle of the process of filming, but to go through the option, and then to go through the script
Hmm.
adaptations, and to see that whole process, how that works, and to continue to work on that script even as you're filming. That's interesting as too. They're not like set in stone, because you make a change here as you're going, or almost like a military plan. Like you plan it in a room, sterile environment. You think it's the greatest plan in the world, and then either you get out there and things change, or someone comes in from the outside and it's like, "Hey, did you think of this?" And everybody's standing
Yeah.
around the table like, "Oh," because you fall in love with your own plan.
Right.
So, which is which is dangerous. So it's cool. So when you get out there, situation and terrain dictate some changes, or something that sounded good in your head as dialogue when you're adapting the script. All of a sudden, you get out there and Chris says it, and you're like, that didn't sound the same way it did when I thought, we were
Right.
in here. And Chris says, yeah, that doesn't really work. Let's change it to this. And you're like, yeah, okay, go. But that also has ripple effects down to other scripts, depending on how
Yeah.
you change and relationship wise and all that stuff. So it's fun to continually adapt these things as you go. And my biggest takeaway from the set is that just how hard everybody works.
Mm.
And then also how specialized each and every person is in their profession. So it's which makes them very efficient if everybody's there. So
Right.
in SEAL team or whatever, we all have certain training that overlaps in case someone gets wounded or killed, or whatever else, or isn't on a mission, or is task organized. Gives you options for task organization depending on the mission parameters, whatever. But here you're so specialized. And then I think there's unions in place that like actually keep you from doing certain things, which
Mm.
now I understand. Now
Yeah.
I get, having been there, because when you're on the outside, you're looking in, you're like, oh, why can't everybody just work together and get it done? Well, because some directors would be crazy and would keep people there for like weeks on end with no
Yeah.
sleep. Like that's, and so, because of that, probably that's why they have these
Yeah.
rules where you have to like only shoot for 12 hours, which is a long day, actually.
Right.
Like you're doing these things that are going on that are super physical or super just intense.
Yeah.
And then everybody has a separate thing that they do. The guy that holds the mic here, the guy that's moving the camera here, the person that's moving the vehicles around, the stuntman, the explosives guy. Like, all
Hmm.
these people are working together, but they're so specialized in what they do. So that was cool. That was my biggest takeaway, I think, was just, from the outside, we watch a show and we're very, very quick to be like, oh, that's
Right.
horrible, or that, why did they do that, or that was messed up, or that guy never did a press check, or whatever it is,
Right.
and it's so easy to do that from the couch and then go on to your next thing and check Instagram. But really, when you're 350 people working on these things, working these long hours, and they're so just involved in this and so dedicated to it from at every single level, it's really cool. And it's like a military operation. You have like crash
Yeah.
food services is there feeding everybody. You have the explosives guy, just like in your platoon, you have your breacher. You
Hmm.
have your weapons guy in the platoon, and same thing here. You have a weapons guy on set, and you're turning back in your nods, your night vision. You're turning
Hmm.
back in your weapon. He's checking that off, checking the serial numbers, making sure there's accountability for everything from all the actors. The transportation guy, just like in a platoon, you have your mobility guys that are
Hmm.
specializing in that. Then you have the commanding officer, which is like Antoine Fuqua directing, like he's the
Yeah.
commanding officer. And then you have Chris there, who's like the platoon commander or troop commander, at that tactical level. And those guys are kind of setting the tone for everything else that happens there. So there are a lot of similarities to
Yeah.
the military operation.
Probably feels right at home for you then,
Yeah, it was great,
in a
especially that
sense.
first episode because it was SEAL centric, and so we had I think
Yeah.
12 guys that I worked with in the teams. A good buddy I was downrange with in Iraq on my last deployment, and we're all there having a reunion. So that
That's
was that
awesome.
was amazing. Yeah, it was super fun.
So, how involved are you in the actual show process? Like, are you consulting? Are you like involved in the writing, or what is your role in all of that?
Yeah, so I was very involved in the first script because then the showrunner slash screenwriter, he takes that
Hmm.
with Antoine and Chris, and then they shopped it around. They took it to
Mm.
Amazon, they took it to Netflix, they took it to Apple, they took it to HBO, they took it to all these different places, and then did their business thing, and then Amazon ended up with it. From there, Amazon invests, and they get a writer's room together. So like 15 different writers. So I advised on those scripts, but then those writers are only contracted for a certain amount of time, and they go off to other projects, and then it
Mm.
reverts back to the showrunner and another screenwriter. So then we continue to refine those scripts. They go to Chris, they go to Antoine, they go up the chain at Amazon, just like in any big bureaucracy. They go up to the top, people
Yep.
make their notes, and then they come back down with those questions and notes. So it's a very interesting process, very different than writing a novel where it's just you. And in my case, it's funny. I was on an interview, God, maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and I was with a reviewer who is also trying to get a book published, and he was talking about this, and it was three of us on there. There were two interviewers and me, and they started talking about editorial calls, and I'm nodding my head, like, oh, an editorial call, yeah. And then finally, I'm like, what's an editorial call? Well, that's when you're editor and you plan out the next book and talk about the direction. And I'm like, never had one. Like, never had any direction from Simon and Schuster at all, which is so cool,
That's awesome.
because I have just free reign to do it. And I didn't
Yeah.
know that going in. You think, okay, you're going to Simon and Schuster, they're probably going to say, hey, you might want to ease off here, you might want to add a
Right.
little something here. Let's do this. Zero, none of that ever.
That's awesome.
Not to say it won't ever happen ever, but up to this
Right.
point, anyway, no one's ever even hinted to me that I should do something or shouldn't do something. They have let me had complete free reign throughout this, and I really didn't know stepping in. So, yeah, I've never had an editorial call. So, point
That's
being,
awesome.
that's different than the process when you're doing a
Right.
script when
Right.
so many people are involved, which also. Now I mean, I've always been forgiving when I find a mistake somewhere or
Mm-hmm.
anything. It's just, fine. I don't let it ruin my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like when what was that coffee cup that left behind in Game of Thrones, and everyone's
Yep.
like, I see how easy it is to do that
Yes. The
because
Starbucks
there's
cup.
so many takes that you do from so many different angles for all this stuff, and then people come in, and then you have to reshoot. And it's
Yep.
so easy to have something a bit out of place, or to
Yep.
leave a water bottle
Just
behind in
slip
the
through the
wrong place.
cracks.
So easy.
Yeah.
And then that's not even talking about once it gets to editing, and then the people that were like doing the technical advising on set aren't there in the editing room, and they use
Mm.
something that a take that where the actor did something wrong with like a weapon or whatever else,
Oh.
or the angle might be he might have done everything right, or but the angle just doesn't look quite right,
Yeah.
and so people are like, oh, screenshot bullshit.
Yeah.
I can see how easy it is now after being on set for those things to slip through. So I'm even more forgiving now than I was
I
previously.
bet. That's awesome. From I have to ask from the Chris Pratt standpoint, because I've heard you say like he was who you had in mind, like writing the first book, or even prior to that, like when he was still Andy Dwyer on
Yeah.
Parks and Rec and wasn't like an Avenger yet, basically like a superhero. So I don't know if it changed from the time when you were writing it to now that he's actually a part of it, but do you write with him in mind as James? Like, does that come into your conscience at all as you write it? He is the one playing this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I look at them as distinctly different. So I look at
Right.
him playing my character,
Right.
which is different than him as my character, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
So I think anybody else writing out there, I think that's helpful not to picture like as a child of the '80s, it's impossible for me not to picture people playing these different roles. But that's the
Right.
key is that they are actors playing a role.
Yeah.
They're not the person. So as I'm writing, and this might change once I see the series, especially if it's good,
Right.
that might change, and I might see Chris in that role. But right now, I don't. It's the opposite of that. I see Chris
Interesting.
playing James Reese, not
Okay.
Chris is James Reese as I'm writing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, when I read it, I'm totally just in my mind's eye just picturing Pratt doing all of it,
Nice.
which
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
it's
No,
fun.
yeah,
Like it's cool because like even like because I've heard you say before like the reason you liked him so much is because he is so relatable on like a lot of levels personally, and like so like the little funny quips and stuff like that. That's totally like right up Chris Pratt alley. And so like I
yeah.
read those little funny one liners that come in, so I'm like, oh yeah, it's totally Pratt.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like people already like him, so he's coming into
Yeah,
this. He doesn't have
totally.
to win the audience over as far as likability.
Yeah.
So in fact, it's the opposite. Like in this case, he's done so many things, like Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy and Jurassic
Yeah.
World and these things right now that are so different than this. And now he's primal, he's visceral, he's violent, he's
Yeah.
dark. he's gritty. So all these things that the audience hasn't seen him do yet. So this is the
Yeah.
first time they'll see him in this role. But regardless, because he's likable on screen
Mm-hmm.
and off screen, and he comes into that with both of those already attached. Now playing this character James Reese, so it's a really cool thing I think for him as his career continues to
Yeah.
go this direction, and so it's a cool test also. So audience will be like, all right, it's time for Chris to prove that he can do this, and I'll tell you,
Yeah.
he's crushing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I texted him the other day. I'm like, after I left the set, and I'm like, hey, I had high expectations, and you exceeded each and every one of them, and
That's
so very
awesome.
cool. Yeah,
From the and you bring up a cool point from the like the violence standpoint. I'm curious as it relates to the making something for viewing. Some of the stuff in some of these novels is like some pretty intense, violent stuff. Like, have you already had to have the conversations of what can and maybe shouldn't be in like the Amazon series, or is there anything that they just say because it's Amazon, do whatever you want?
no, so they didn't say. There's some things that didn't make it in because you have 8 episodes,
Okay.
which is a great way to tell this story.
Yeah.
I don't think anything didn't make it in because it was violent,
Okay.
and now there's one particular thing that's back in that wasn't there that I think people will be really happy with. Of course, everything can change, so I'll be a little bit
Right.
hesitant to fully commit
Sure.
until it's actually out there. Then I can go back and tell the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't be happier with how things are working out. Of course, there's going to be, and for me, it's important also, I think, to set the tone. Like, hey, it's going to be different. You're telling a
Yeah.
story visually rather than on the written page. So anyone that's seen any adaptation of anything knows that it's going to be different. And you can
Sure.
either go in, and if it's not exactly the same, then be completely dissatisfied. You see that in it
Yeah.
when but you can also go in with, hey, this is a film adaptation of a novel. It's going to be different. Let's see how they do.
Yeah.
Like that's the way to approach any of these things. Because if you ever go in to watch a movie of your favorite novel or a novel you enjoyed, and you're going in thinking, hey, if it's not exactly the same, I am going to be furious. They will have ruined it. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I guess a lot of people go through life that way, especially if you
Setting
read
yourself up to be
Twitter
bummed
comments and
out.
YouTube comments. Like,
Yeah.
that's not a good way to approach things.
Seriously.
I mean, shouldn't say good way to approach that. I mean, it's a way to approach things, but it just doesn't seem like it. You want to be a happy person and enjoy life. You can go in and be like, oh, let's see how they did with this thing. Oh, that's cool. I see they changed that or this. There's just
Yeah.
everything in life is about attitude. You get to choose. It's not nobody
Yeah.
else but you. So yeah,
I love
good
it.
luck and best
I'm
wishes.
I'm pumped. And so you said 20, so to wrap up that part, 2022 is the release when you're
Yeah, yeah. I
thinking?
don't have an exact date yet. I
Yeah.
don't think we even have one, but yeah,
Sure.
yeah, sometime in 2022, I
Awesome.
think. So it goes into some post production after they finish filming, and then I'm not sure exactly how the process works from there, but I'll be learning. I'm always soaking it all in. Always learning.
Awesome. And hopefully it becomes massive success and we get to do more seasons for all the other ones as well.
Yeah, let's hope so.
I'm
So we'll see.
pumped.
It's my first experience with anything like this, but it's also cool to have people coming up to me on set and saying, "Hey, we've worked on hundreds of films, and we have not. This one feels different. Like
Cool.
everybody is so cool. Everybody is so nice. Chris and Antoine, all these directors, everybody's so focused, and
Yeah.
so it's really cool to have people coming up to me on set and then asking to take pictures or sign books or say, "Hey, my son just joined the Marine Corps. He's in boot camp right now. He's a huge fan of the books," and I'm like, yeah, here's a book. Wish him my best.
That's
Boom.
awesome.
So I love doing that, and I guess that's also not very typical on set. So a lot of people made that comment as well that
That's
it's not
awesome.
typical to have people coming up doing that sort of thing. So it's really cool. It does feel like a family.
Yeah. I'm pumped, man. So I mentioned to you that so we're recording this for the podcast, but we're live streaming this into my coaching group, and I talked to the guys in there and told them that we were going to be talking today, and said if there was any questions that they had that they wanted me to ask. And we have a couple of like pretty heavy gearheads that are in my coaching group, so they
Nice.
just dig right into what you do, because you are a super gearhead writer and detailed with all that stuff. And specifically, I was told to ask about the Land Cruiser,
Nice.
and because you just had the whole thing basically rebuilt and all that stuff. And so uh, that's a main staple in novels as well, because that's like what James drives. And so basically my question had to do with how you bring the gear from and like the car and all that stuff from really real life into the thing and why that's so important for you to have that tie in.
Yeah, I've been a gear guy since before the military. Just growing up, I was always interested in gear. Kind of grew up on trail systems and going to the backcountry with my parents and that sort of thing. So I was always interested in gear. You know, back then you're reading Outside Magazine and Backpacker Magazine. Of course, I got Soldier of Fortune, so I have that. So I was like looking at all these things, and then I'm wondering, hey, why is this all this outdoor stuff so technical and high speed? And then I go to the Army surplus store here in town, or I look at something on the military side of the house or the hunting side of the house, and it's just like bulky and anyway. So I'm always asking questions about gear and figuring out how
Yeah.
we can do it better and faster. That continued in the military, and it continues today. But because of that background, I just gear tells me a story. So if I see
Yeah.
you and you're wearing a leather holster and a leather belt with a 1911 cocked and locked, that tells me something about you. I see something. I see you wearing a nylon belt with a Kydex holster and a striker fire pistol. That tells me something else.
Hmm.
But all this gear tells a story, to include the vehicles. Yeah, growing up, of course, vehicles were a mainstay of 80s television. They were like
Hmm.
characters in and of themselves. So what people drive, and in real life, that tells me something about them as well. So the Land Cruiser was important. It's my vehicle,
Yeah.
so it's natural that it's my protagonist vehicle. And then the Land Cruiser community is just awesome. Like I've never met someone who's I've never met a Land Cruiser aficionado who wasn't cool. Just
Yeah.
like yeah, it's just a really awesome community. People are super super into it and want to see other people's rigs and see what they did and how they did it and all that sort of thing. So very cool. Plus, I've used them all over the world, and so I'm just a fan. So yeah, the Land Cruiser that they got for the series is pretty sweet. I don't want to give too much away.
Cool.
I think there's some paparazzi shots of it online, but it's really cool how they have to get multiple vehicles. They
Oh
can't just
yeah.
have one; they get multiple, and
Yeah.
so there's some cool things coming with that.
That's awesome. I almost had I had a chance because I was talking to some guy. So I'm up in Boise area in Idaho, and I was messaging back and forth with a guy who had one. I believe it was an '87, and he was back in North Carolina or something like that, and he had listed it. And like before I even had the chance to send another reply back after we'd gone back and forth, he'd sold it to somebody else. And I was like, oh, now like I would have flown out and got the thing and driven it back. And
I
I was
know.
like,
Especially
they're
you
hard
find
to
one
find,
today and
man.
it's not rusted out and it's like, original
Yeah,
low miles. Like that's, oh man, if you can find that stuff, because most people have done something to them at this point or they've been
yeah,
sitting or, who knows. So I'm always on the lookout as well. So I have an FJ40 that's getting redone now with
nice.
Corsetti Cruisers out in LA. I always wanted an FJ40. So that's coming. I think it's like a year out, but yeah, it takes a while to do these things. And then I'm
Oh,
looking for
for
an
sure.
80. I'm looking for that 40th
80.
anniversary 80 edition, 80 series that
Nice.
has the factory locking diffs and that sort of thing. So I want to, but yeah, once again, you gotta search, and once
Yeah,
again, it takes
gotta
time.
dig.
So yeah, one thing it's not at the top of my list as far as how I start my day, but if I come across one, it's on the list.
Right. And then to continue on with the gear stuff, because one of the other questions that was brought up to ask you more had to do with EDC stuff, because you post a lot about in your blog when you have all your gear guides and all that kind of stuff. Um, a couple of the guys that I work with had asked me specifically, like, where do I even start when it comes to this kind of thing? And so I thought that would be a good question to ask you, is like, if someone's coming into kind of the EDC world, everyday carry world, like what are some of the basics that you would include if you're like helping someone just like figure out what to do?
Yeah, Fieldcraft Survival is a great resource for all that stuff. Like that's what they do,
Yeah.
is teach preparedness. They have a great website you can go through. I've done some stuff with them out here. They're right down the road in Heber, Utah. I mean, people drove out from California. They drove out from Colorado. I couldn't believe it the other day when I did a talk there with Mike Glover out there, his former Army Special Forces guy,
Yeah.
who's just awesome, by the way. But probably those types of resources, like starting there and then
Hmm.
looking around, seeing where you live, who's passing through town, that does courses. Okay, you can kind of research their background, see online who they do things with online, who they follow. Back in the day, you couldn't do that. You walk up in your gun store and there'd be a card, 3x5 card with somebody's name and a number on it. You're like, okay, I guess this is the guy around
We'll
here. Or
try.
now you can actually go online and look at these backgrounds. And
Yeah.
it's a lot harder to get away with saying you were something that you weren't today because it's all
Yeah.
out there. But so yeah, it's a journey, and starting at square one is one, hey, that's good that you recognized it probably over this last year. You were like, ooh, I didn't particularly last March, last April, when you were like, oh geez, I don't know if there's going to be food at the grocery store. I don't know if
Right.
I'm going to have a job tomorrow. So people started thinking about preparedness in general back then, and started thinking, oh geez, maybe I need this financial foundation, and some savings just in case I don't have a job
Yeah.
tomorrow. How long do I need? Well, what's my family like? Where do I live? Do you need 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 4 months? Like, what does that look like? It's going to be different for everybody. Then also preparedness levels where you live. Okay, food, water filtration system. Oh, maybe I should get it. Then the summer of civil unrest hits, and people started
Yeah.
thinking, oh, geez. I mean, they were thinking about it before. Like, hey, if I call 911 back in that time when everything was so uncertain with COVID in early 2020, not knowing if someone was going to be there to pick up the phone, people are already starting to think, oh, maybe I am responsible for the safety of myself and my
Yeah.
family. What do I need to do to be prepared there? Oh, maybe I should look into getting a firearm. Okay, then they start their journey, from there. Of course, the most important part of that is the training aspect.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a lifestyle is an overused word, but it's a journey. It's just a part of life, and it's so natural, for a lot of us. And if it's not for you, and you start thinking about it, it probably will become natural because we're
Yeah.
here because we had ancestors who were good at defending the tribe, good at putting food on the table, because you had to be good at those two
Right.
things to live. Today, you'll be able to outsource a lot of that stuff, or you think you can outsource that stuff. But society is fragile, as the last year has taught people that didn't know that before. That's why travel is so important. Go to these different countries. Go into Africa. Go into Southeast Asia. Go into India. Go into Russia. Go into these different places. Go into South America, Central America, because you get a feel for just how fragile society can be.
Yeah.
And then you take those lessons home, and you're more appreciative of the freedoms that we have here. One, and then two, you realize, oh, okay, maybe those things could happen here if you've grown up thinking that they'll never happen here in the United
Yeah.
States. No way. It's the United States. So it really comes back to your responsibility as a citizen. Is hey, who's responsible for the safety of your family? You.
Yeah.
Who's responsible for putting that food on the table? You. And so that really started a lot of people along this journey, I think. And if they have the time, they should make the time. But it's going to one of these places, like going to Thunder Ranch, going to Sea Academy, going to some of these places that are established, that you trust. And that probably even more important than just being on the range and learning, okay, here's your draw stroke. Okay, great. Is just being around people that
Yeah.
are also thinking about some of those things that you are thinking about, being prepared, thinking about taking care of their families, all that sort of thing. So it's just like, oh, okay, got it. And you get some certain ideas from these different people, and you kind of feel more comfortable in that segment of society, and you kind of just you move along your journey from there, just like with anything else.
So, do you have a couple of favorite pieces right now that are like, because I imagine yours is kind of evolving fairly regularly, or maybe not. I don't know. But do you have a couple of things that you are part of your kind of everyday carry kit that are your favorites right now?
Yep, yep. So it's a fixed blade, which is right out here. I have a little tray out here where
Mm-hmm.
the fixed blade is, a light is, so a folder. So for opening up all these boxes and things like that. So it's not the fixed blade that you're going to be fighting with. So you always know that one is sharp,
Mm-hmm.
rather than, oh geez, I opened the 3,000 boxes with this the other day, and now it's my also the tool that I'm going to use if I'm in a fight and I need to go to a blade. So yeah, I have different blades for that. So those so two blades. and
Mm-hmm.
and it's not about being paranoid. It's just like being prepared. Like,
Yeah.
it's just easy. You just walk out the door with that stuff, and it just becomes
Yeah.
kind of natural. Usually I carry that P365 just because it's just such a great concealed carry pistol.
Same.
If we're going somewhere else, or I think, I don't know, I'm going to take another second to think about it. Then the P320 AXG Scorpion is a pretty sweet pistol that I've
Nice.
loved and been carrying for a while. So I have all these setups, I have all these holsters. That's I have a lot of choices. I like options.
Yeah.
I have a light on my pistol, then I also carry one, because you don't want to be covering something with your muzzle because you happen to have a light on your pistol, but you don't have another one to
Mm-hmm.
light up something that doesn't need to be covered down on with a pistol. So it's just some basic stuff like that. But
Yeah.
but people whose lives revolve around teaching people to be prepared, like Mike Glover at Fieldcraft Survival, I think that's probably a good way for people to
Yeah.
start.
For sure. We're gonna wrap up here because I know you gotta get going. But I wanted to bring up before we bounce, you got podcast yourself now, that is fairly new. How has that been going? I imagine you've probably been getting requested forever about just getting your own already, right?
Yeah, and I wanted to do it for a while. Actually recorded my first episode in November of 2019. Yeah, November 2019. And because I wanted to do that because social media just I get a lot of questions, and a
Yeah.
lot of the questions, if you answer with a one sentence or two sentence answer on a Twitter or Instagram when you're talking about something that requires a little more nuance, a little more thought, maybe it's a contentious issue, that sort of thing, all it does is dissolve into to chaos fairly quickly. So the podcast is a way for me to have that long form conversation like we're having now, which
Hmm.
is a lot. I don't know. It's just a better format for
Yeah.
discussing some of these things. So that was the original reason that I wanted to, because people kept reaching out with these questions. I didn't want to answer with one sentence online, and then have it just everybody chime in and interpret it however they want, and then yeah.
Right.
So I didn't want to add to that chaos. If you know what I mean, there's plenty of that out there.
Yeah.
You can find it
Totally.
very easily if you're looking, which I don't really recommend. But yeah, so podcast is a better way to do that. So I can go back now and say, hey, you know what I really meant? I don't know if that came off quite right. What I meant to say was
Hmm.
this. If that makes sense, then you say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Then follow up the question. It's just more thoughtful way to discuss these things. So I don't think social media in general has been very good for our national discourse or our civility.
Yeah,
Or,
I would
you
agree.
know, it's just how it goes.
Are you having a good time doing the podcast though? Because I
Yeah,
think we're
yeah.
like
So
seven,
Danger
eight
Close.
episodes in.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think 8 dropped
Yeah.
today. So they drop every Wednesday, and yeah, it's called Danger Close Beyond the Books with Jack Carr, which allows me to really talk to anybody about anything. So it's super fun, and yeah,
Awesome.
this little podcast studio thing set up here right here, just off camera. That's I just like press a button and record and go. So yeah, it's just another way to engage with readers, also that people couldn't have done, authors couldn't have done 30 years ago. Couldn't have done that if you're an author in 1965, 75, 85, 95. But today, I can do that. I can thank people
Yeah.
for taking a risk on me as a new author, for reading the books, and for telling a friend. So it's another outlet, another platform where I can do that. So I figure might as well. It's available. It's out there. So might as well take advantage of it and for engagement purposes, and be able to thank people that have taken a risk on me.
That's awesome, and everybody should go check it out because I've listened to the first two or three, and it's awesome. So
Oh, thank you.
yeah, yeah, go check it out, and we'll wrap up here. Jack, thank you for making the time today. It was awesome to get to talk to you, and hopefully we can do it again when the next book comes around, and stay in touch. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, man. No, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I sincerely appreciate it. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.